Welcome everyone to Credit Work Canada's webinar on maximizing the benefits of membership with Credit Work Canada. We're glad that you've joined us today, both because it's the end of our Queer and Teen series, which we've been very proud of, but also that we get to kind of connect with you in a different way, in a different type of presentation than we have been providing throughout the year. So Pride at Work Canada, through dialogue, education, and thought leadership, we empower employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We help create safer, more inclusive workspaces that realize the full potential of all employees and bring down barriers to employment. Our learning, networking, and community events happen across the country, celebrating and connecting the most inclusive Canadian employers. Today's presentation is part of our ongoing online program series as part of #QueerandTeen. These sessions are available to all employees of Pride at Work Canada's national and regional partners. But for March, April, and May, we've opened them to the public. And so today's session will focus on maximizing the benefits of partnership with Credit Work Canada, and we've reserved some time at the end of today's presentation to answer questions, but we're only able to answer questions that are directly related to the subject matter being explored in today's session, notably who we are and what we do. If you have any questions about other subjects, we're still happy to answer them, but please direct them to info@prideatworkcanada.ca or prideatwork.ca, or check out our upcoming webinars to see if we have an upcoming session that addresses your topic of interest. Our presenter today is Colin Druin, who, before we get to our presenter, we always like to do a land acknowledgement. Pride at Work Canada works on the traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people. We recognize that there are multiple barriers that impact Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people from accessing meaningful, affirming, and inclusive employment. In our work, we look to reduce those barriers and are open to feedback from Indigenous workers, employers, and job seekers in making that a reality. Where our offices are held and where I am speaking from today is Takaranto or Toronto, which is the Dish with One Spoon territory, which is traditionally the home of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and as somebody of mostly white settler descent, who is working as an uninvited visitor of this territory, it's always important to me that we recognize that the land that we're on, and that we work in as many ways as possible to support Indigenous resurgence. We'll be doing some programming over the summer that addresses that in more detail, but we are always open to feedback from Indigenous workers, employers, and job seekers. Today's presenter is Colin Druin, who's the Executive Director of Pride at Work Canada, and also my boss. He has been the Executive Director of Pride at Work since 2014, and in that time, he's grown Pride at Work Canada from an organization of 30 to 40 partners to over 100 and somebody of inspiration to many of us. I'm not just saying that because I'm saying that out of genuineness of my heart. And if you want to learn more, doesn't admit that he's an Ontarian yet, Nova Scotian, to
my pronouns are he, and I'd just like to point out me that's on wearing the same shirt today, just to let you know how thrifty I am, thrifty and fashionable I am. So a little tidbit for you. Thanks, Jade, for that warm introduction. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about what we do at Pride at Work Canada. Before we get started talking about what we do, I wanted to address kind of who we're talking about with our programming. And, Jade and their intro and me throughout this presentation, I'll be using the acronym LGBTQ2+, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, two-spirit, and plus to represent kind of pluralism or other identities that are not listed. And, you have to use this as shorthand, and I tend to try and not use acronyms if I can help it. I try and just kind of talk about our community, because our work and the presentation that I'll be giving today, they encompass anyone who identifies as a sexual or gender minority, anybody who faces harassment, discrimination, or other challenges on the grounds of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation, or sex characteristics. So I don't want us to be limited in thinking that the work that we do is only for the people or the identities, excuse me, that are in that LGBTQ2+ acronym. What we try and do is really focus on those grounds and think of anybody who might be impacted by, like I said, discrimination or other challenges as a result of those grounds. So that's really who we're talking about today. And I'll start our presentation by talking a little bit about who we are and what it is that we do. And then we'll go through and elaborate on some of the programs that we have and some of the tips that we've developed for you to take good advantage of those programs as a member of Pride at Work Canada. So we're the leading national organization promoting workplace cultures that are inclusive of LGBTQ2+ people, as I mentioned. So I'm just I have to go. And these are just some pictures of some of how we talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we do at our events. So normally, if this was an in-person event, when you came, we would help you fill out a name tag, or we'd have a name tag printed for you, and we'd ask you to put on a pronoun sticker if you were comfortable. We have our own Pride at Work Canada branded pronoun stickers. They come in, I think, about 5 or 6 different kinds, and there's actually one kind that you can draw in your own pronouns if you so wish. And then we've got a couple of shots here from our annual workplace summit that was to take place in April, but because of COVID, we've had to postpone it, and we're still trying to reimagine what that looks like in the new reality. But in 2018, we were really lucky to have Stuart Milk, who's the chair of the Harvey Milk Foundation. He's the nephew of Harvey Milk, and he does a lot of great advocacy work in the United States and globally. And then in 2019, we had MPP Jill Andrew deliver keynote remarks. She's the first openly queer Black MPP in the Ontario legislature, and she's a huge supporter of the work that we do. And I believe that she'll be delivering some remarks at one of our upcoming virtual Pro Pride events this year as well. So a little bit of what you might have seen from some of our in-person events in the past. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing the slide. There we go. So who we are at the Pride at Work Canada team, there's a picture of me and Jade, of course, but we've got 2 other full-time staff, Prue and Luis, and then we've got a part-time staff member in Quebec, Florence. Everybody on the team is an absolute superstar. I have to say, I've been just so impressed by everybody, especially through all of the pivoting that we've had to do as a result of the pandemic, having to move a lot of our programs online. I think that the team has, despite their distance from each other, has worked really well. And I think that really speaks to their professionalism and the motivation that they bring to their work. Collectively, we come from 3 different countries of origin, and we speak 5 languages. So at Pride at Work Canada, we're proof positive that you can have diversity in really small teams. So when companies say to me, like, well, there's no way that we can engage in diversity and inclusion practices, we're just too small to support those types of things, I always tell them to look at us as an example. And I also like to draw attention to the outstanding work of our board of directors. So we've got 15 directors on the board of Pride at Work Canada. They're all senior professionals who either identify as members of our community or are allies to the community with strong backgrounds in diversity and inclusion, and they really direct the mission and vision and strategy for Pride at Work Canada. And it's my honor as ED to work with them directly. We've got a whole bunch of really fantastic subcommittees full of volunteers, and you'll learn a little bit more about the work of our ambassadors across the country in the presentation as well. So I always like to start talking about Pride at Work Canada by kind of talking to you about what gets us out of bed in the morning, why it is that we do the work that we do. I have to admit, like, there's so many things that you'll learn from today's presentation about how diversity and inclusion benefits businesses. But I have to admit that, improving profitability at companies in Canada is not the thing that gets me to leap out of bed in the morning. I have a background of working in schools and education, social services, the arts organizations. And throughout my career, and I know throughout the careers of everybody else at Pride at Work Canada, we've been able to see some of the impacts that harassment and discrimination and different systemic barriers have had on our community. So just a few of the highlights of the things that really keep us going. It's estimated that a relatively small amount of the population identifies as a member of our community. There's no real reliable numbers because the census doesn't capture that data, and so it's spotty. So we're kind of relying on a number of different sources. But we actually see overrepresentation of queer and trans people among Canada's homeless population. So when you think about how a relatively small amount of the population takes up a rather large amount of the homeless population, you can start to see some discrepancies in Canada. And some of the things that contribute to that are, a lot of folks are coming out younger and younger, and many times, they kind of lose the support of their immediate family, and sometimes their extended family as well. A lot of youth find it really difficult to find their first job. I was really lucky to get my first job through a friend of my dad's. And that's the story that a lot of people share in Canada. But if you don't have that connection to your family, it can cause a really rough start to your time in the workforce. We also see that there's lots of evidence that queer and trans folks graduate from post-secondary programs with significantly higher student debt than their peers. There was a TransPulse Canada study that happened this year that I believe was national, and it found that while there's a great many trans people in Canada have some university or college education, about half make $30,000 a year or less. So there's some really acute issues that we see in trans and gender diverse communities that we try and address with our work. And then, of course, a lot of the work that we look at through the lens of perhaps health benefits or employee wellness programs that LGBTQ2 plus youth are at 14 times the risk of suicide than their peers. And there's because of above average experiences with violence, a lot of folks in the community are at higher risk of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and other phobic disorders. And then on the kind of specifically on the employer side, some of the things that we see at workplaces is that a lot of companies, they really want to do what's best for our community, but they are not quite sure how. So, we see a lot of people have, policies that are just unevenly applied, and it's because they don't know what they don't know. So we did a survey a number of years ago, and we found that a lot of large companies have a policy that bars discrimination on sexual orientation, but not as many have, gender expression and gender identity included in those policies as well. So, there's just a lack of recognition of the diversity of the community there and some of the needs. And then mostly, large employers, they provide health benefits to a lot of full-time employees. But we do find that there's kind of inconsistent application, particularly when it comes to transition-related care, gender-affirming care for trans workers. And then, I think a lot of this is as a result of the fact that, there's certain segments of the queer and trans population that we just see really underrepresented in Canada's workforce. And if those folks aren't around the table to say, hey, I need this, or there's a process here that's not working for me, then employers aren't going to know. So that's one of the roles that we'd like to play at Pride at Work Canada. And one of the things that we like to stress is urgency, is that the world is changing. I think a lot of us are starting to really realize maybe how far behind we were as we try to pivot to remote work and all these other wonderful things during the pandemic. But we're seeing that a lot of job seekers are more likely to accept a position with employers that are inclusive of our community. Inclusive companies perform better in the marketplace, and diverse teams make better decisions. These are all kind of all-star lines from the script for selling diversity and inclusion. And it used to really be the way that we talked about what we do. That was kind of what we put forward. But like I said, we really like to talk about the need that we see in the community because, we are an organization that works with a lot of large corporate entities. But at the end of the day, we're a small not-for-profit that really our mission is to see a country where everybody can achieve their full potential at work, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, gender expression. So when we look at the most important stakeholder group for us, it really is that community, and it's really helping that community get a better kick at the can, so to speak, and have the opportunity that we know all of us should have in Canada. And one of the things that we hear from employers is we have such a great inclusive culture. Like, I really want to be a place that queer and trans people want to work. And I think that that's enough. Like, we want to do well and we have good hearts. And I think that's very wonderful to have those great intentions. But what we at Pride at Work Canada like to do is underscore that there's some very real work that needs to be done to see some progress on those intentions. So some of the things that we ask people who say, well, we've got a great culture, I don't think that there's any problems, I don't think we have to really worry about this or focus on this. We like to ask them things like, do you know demographics of your organization? Like, do you know the different identities that exist? Do you know of any folks who are trans or gender diverse who work in your organization? Are you aware of some of the health benefits that you offer, and if there's any barriers that are put up as a result of improper wording or things that aren't included? And then we also ask them, do your employees know how to report cases of harassment? Because people will say, well, we've never had a complaint about anything. So that's why I think we have a great culture. If employees don't feel comfortable bringing forward complaints or flagging things, they're more likely to seek outside help. So they're more likely to take things to some sort of outside body, and then you've got to deal with them coming in and instead of just having an open conversation with your employees about what you can do to improve. So these are some of the kind of questions we ask up front. And a lot of folks wonder about our membership model and kind of why we chose that model. So Pride at Work Canada doesn't provide direct to client services. So we don't do anything directly with the community. So we're actually, we're incorporated as a not-for-profit. We're not a charity. So we don't do, employment counseling or anything like that with individuals. Our stakeholders from a program perspective are employers, because we think that for queer and trans people in Canada to confront economic challenges, they need good jobs, and they need good jobs with rising incomes. So they don't just need to be able to get work. They need to be able to get work that's affirming and work that really helps them advance at the same rate as everybody else. And because of stigma and stereotypes and bias, a lot of people, just giving those folks skills is not enough, because we see a great many people who are highly skilled, highly motivated, really good at their jobs, simply not able to get hired anywhere. So it's not enough to try and get the candidates to be high quality. You also have to have employers that are understanding of the needs of those candidates and those workers, and make sure that they're able to take advantage of that talent and everything that they bring to the table. So we operate as a member service agency for employers, and we provide those employers guidance through our programming to help them be better employers. And one of the things I like to point out is that we're not a charity, so we don't have access to the same, funding opportunities as some charities that you might be aware of. So we don't have access to grants that come from different levels of government, from foundations, because we're incorporated as a not-for-profit, not a charity. So 85% of our revenue is from membership fees from our employer members. So that's why during Pride season, when companies that aren't currently part of our membership network, they get in touch with us and they say, well, we'd love somebody to come in and do a presentation or something like that. And we just say, well, if you'd like us to do that, we would love for you to become a member, because we're doing that work year round with all of the companies that we work with. And because we don't get revenue from other sources, just our members, we can't just use our staff resources to go out and give free presentations all over the place or do free consulting work, because unlike charities who receive funding from different levels of government in order to go out and provide services to the community, those membership fees, that's the only way that we have to pay our staff and keep the lights on and pay for technology to do all these great webinars. So that's a little bit about why we have a membership model and why we think it's the best model for the type of work that we do to help employers be the best that they can be for our community. And when we look at that member programming, we try and center it on the needs of two really distinct stakeholder groups. And this is after, a couple of years of working with lots of employers, figuring out who really needs the content the most. So the first group that we really try and target with a lot of what we do is people who have inclusion outcomes as a deliverable of their job. So these are people who are measured on KPIs related to diversity and inclusion. Whether or not they advance in the workplace or, they get a bonus or a raise or whatever, their performance is measured on diversity outcomes. So we try and make sure that those folks have the tools to measure what it is that they're doing appropriately, make sure that they're actually delivering a return on the organization's investment in diversity and inclusion, and make sure that they have the tools that they need to make sure that they're performing an essential business function. So this is obviously people from HR, diversity and inclusion. Sometimes we work with people from marketing, and people who might have a role within an employee resource group where they're given time away from their day job to do work with the employee resource group or the affinity group or diversity council or whatever it happens to be. One of the things that we recognize, particularly around people who work in D&I, is that they usually come from having one particular area of expertise. A lot of the D&I practitioners I know, they come from doing a lot of work in the women's leadership space, and then they come to their job and they work for a federally regulated company. So they're occupied doing work around the 4 groups that we see identified in the Employment Equity Act. And then they say, well, I've just never really done a lot of work with LGBTQ2+ communities, and I need help, I need support. So that's who we try and help with this kind of this target. This target group is the one that we try and serve with some of our programming. Now, the other group that we try and target with a lot of our programming is general employee populations that just need a better understanding. So, for those formal policies that D&I and HR practitioners are introducing to have teeth, for them to actually work and be functional within an organization, there needs to be an understanding of what some of these things, what sexual orientation is, what gender identity, gender expression are, how homophobia and biphobia and transphobia manifest in the workplace. There needs to be some general understanding among the employee population, and there needs to be some understanding just beyond what the identities are. We've all been through those lunch and learns that are very helpful, where they say this LGBTQ2+, these are what all these identities mean. But what we try and do with some of our ongoing programming, one of the things that I think Jade is really remarkable at in putting together slates of programming for our webinars or for our roundtables, is really making sure that we talk about those topics that when you just talk really broadly about the community, there's things that get missed. I think a lot of people really benefit from, we did a great webinar earlier this year that was all about LGBTQ Indigenous folks and Two-Spirit folks, and what the difference is between those two things, and what are some of the terms that we see among those identities, and what are some of the issues that we see of people who are LGBTQ2+ and Indigenous. And I think those are some things that maybe don't get explored in every really general like LGBT 101 session. Or, when we look at we have an example here of a roundtable session that's about strategies for addressing prejudiced clients. So what do you do when you are working somewhere and you've got a great inclusive culture, but your job means that you have to go out into other workplaces where people maybe don't benefit from the same inclusive culture? How do you deal with the questions they have? How do you deal with comments they make, that sort of thing? So trying to get really a deep dive and make sure that there's natural checkpoints throughout the year for employees to check in and, okay, what do I not know about this community? So really trying to make sure that a lot of the work that we do for this population are very zeroed in on very specific topics. And when it comes to engagement with queer and trans communities, we find that a lot of employers, they kind of look around at what other folks are doing and maybe kind of replicate that within their own business. And what we try and do is guide action based on outcomes that are right for that employer. So, we see a lot of employers, for example, that, they need a strong presence in the market because their primary source of revenue is retail sales. So they're going to really want to make sure that they're out in the parades and people are knowing what they're doing internally and they're out there. But there are other organizations that maybe don't have that same relationship with the public, and that they're maybe more of a B2B agency, and they need their clients, which are other businesses, to know how inclusive they are from a supplier diversity perspective. So we really like to kind of zero in with our members on what are your goals within the context of your business model, because every business is going to have different things to shoot for around this. So relative to an employer's maturity level when it comes to D&I, we try and look at different ways of working with them. And this is usually done at the outset of the membership. Or if somebody kind of tries to, somebody with whom we've had a membership for a while, they can reconnect with Jade and we can kind of define like where they are. And I find that this is a really fascinating exercise, going through where people think they're at. Sometimes we work with organizations that are starting out and they feel like, we're so far behind. It seems like everybody else is light years ahead of us in terms of policies and practices and all these things. So it's really a good idea to check in with us and see how you can just level set and say, before we go out with this, amazing ally campaign, let's make sure that we actually have the policies that support this campaign being effective. Because if you're going out and telling people, to start, living out this positive culture, but then you don't have the basic workplace policies that protect folks on the grounds that we talk about, then, it's going to fall really flat. So then we also look at people who are kind of on their way. They're developing a community presence through advertising. They're starting to talk about all of the great things that they're doing within their organization to the outside world. And, they're either establishing or developing employee resource groups. And then they start thinking about, now that we've done all the basic things that we need to do to ensure an inclusive culture, how do we start building that culture? How do we start making sure that we're attracting people from this community to join our business and make sure that they're coming in and making the business better? And then we work with some organizations that are already industry leaders. They're already out there. And those are the ones that, we really help. They help us shape our programming, because we can look to them and say, wow, you've got some really great results from some of the things that you've done. Let's take that and share it with some of our less mature members and see how they can learn from you. So all along this this journey, the different businesses that we work with, they can learn from us, but then also we love the membership model because we have those opportunities like roundtables or some of the virtual discussions that Jade's planning for the summer. They have that opportunity to connect with each other and learn from each other, because like I said, we're only 5 people, right? So we don't have the capacity to go out and do tons of individualized consulting, but we do have the capacity to connect a lot of the folks in our network so they're learning from each other. Because one of the reasons I love working in diversity inclusion is it seems to be a space where people are less competitive. They're more interested in sharing what they know is going to help make things good for the community, not just for their own business. So talking about some of those things that we do, I wanted to go into some of the common pitfalls that we see, because this is a conversation that we tend to have again and again and again with a lot of our members. So I thought, within the context of trying to get the most out of working with Pride at Work Canada, I thought I'd share 3 of the things that kind of come up the most in terms of in terms of where people kind of get tripped up. And I'll take a little break to have a little sip of water. I'm a certified fast talker. So it dries your mouth out a little bit. And I hope if I'm going too fast, people kind of hold on to their questions for the end. So the 3 most common pitfalls that we see. The first one is always starting with Pride engagement and then trying to work backwards. And I think this is one of the things that contributes to the climate of people not respecting corporate engagement with Pride, not seeing it as genuine, because a lot of the times the intention is genuine. But then it kind of falls flat because maybe the organization isn't prepared to go out and engage with folks from the community because they don't have that strong community voice within. And then the second pitfall we see is having ideas for tactics, but not having firm goals. So I'll go over what that means in a second, but basically it means that you're not going to get any results, because if you just do a whole bunch of stuff, you just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. You're not really using your resources effectively. And then the last pitfall that we see that's so unfortunate is focusing only on lesbian and gay cisgender folks. And when I say that, they usually end up just being lesbian and gay cisgender folks that are white and don't necessarily live with disabilities, and the list goes on. If some of the only choosing to work with people who are the most privileged of our community, and leaving other community members behind in the strategy, which is a real oversight. So let's explore these 3 pitfalls a little bit closer. The first one that we talked about is, starting with pride engagement and working backwards. I know how tempting it can be to throw your hat in the ring around pride and say, well, we want to get out there. We want people to see us. Our competitors are in the parade. We need to be there with them. But one of the problems that happens is, especially if people start kind of interrogating, what it is that you do day to day. I think it's great. I talked to a tech company last year where they said, we really want to help the community. We want to get out there during Pride. We want to be donating a bunch of money, and we want to be very visible about it so that people know that we really want to support the community. And what I said was, that's great. I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So let's talk about where you can put that money and where it can have a huge impact on the community. How many LGBTQ2+ people work at your company? And what are you doing to encourage applications? What are you doing to bring down barriers in the hiring process? And they said, well, we're not really thinking about that. We're thinking about how we can help the community. And I always say, a great way of helping the community is offering job opportunities. We see an enormous amount of underemployment and unemployment in the community. So, look at what you can do within your business to open up opportunity for that community, take advantage of their considerable skills. I mean, that's something that you can do to help people right away as well. So it's not just about doing things outside of your workplace. It's about seeing how your workplace can be as inclusive as possible, so that when you go out for those pride engagements, they're seen as super authentic. And when people say, well, great, you're in the parade, but what do you do for trans employees? You can say, well, we have great health benefits that include transition related care, gender affirming care. All of our policies are worded in a way that, folks of all genders can see themselves in those policies and they feel included. All of the spaces that we have, are very inclusive with visible symbols of how we respect, trans rights, and the list goes on, right? So if people start interrogating your commitment, you can say, here are all the wonderful things that we are doing. And that's why we're here today. And that's why we want to engage with you at Pride, because we're proud of what we do as well. So I think it's great when companies engage with Pride. I think it's better when they have some things to, kind of bring out and share when they do that engagement. So Pride Over Canada, we can offer some guidance to ensure those internal efforts are pretty solid. So you can go out with the confidence that, people are going to interrogate what you're doing. They're going to have questions. So we want to make sure that you have answers so that, they're very pleased that you happen to be thinking about the folks in your own house. So the second pitfall that I mentioned is having ideas for tactics, but not really having firm goals. So we want to do some training. That's not really a goal. Sorry, folks. And, I think we have a complete inclusive culture. So we're just going to promote that. We're just going to tell people we're inclusive. That's not really a goal, but saying like, we've had a huge problem with harassment complaints from folks who identify as gay, lesbian, and bi. We want to reduce those complaints on the grounds of sexual orientation across all regions by 50% in 2 years. That's a measurable time referenced goal that you can really go back to, so that when somebody brings forward an activity like training or an ally program or anything, you can say, well, how does this contribute to the goal that we set? And how are we going to make sure that this idea that we have aligns with the outcomes that we're looking for? Because the most important thing to us right now is not being seen at Pride. The most important thing is making sure our employees feel comfortable and supported being out at work. So it's about, working with us is a great way of trying to, fine tune what those goals are. And then we can tell you from our experience working with hundreds of companies how those outcomes were achieved by other businesses. Because, just looking at some other company and saying, oh, well, they're in the Toronto Pride Parade and the Vancouver Pride Parade, let's do that. I mean, if you're a business that does most of your work in Quebec and Alberta, then doing exactly what that other company is doing isn't really going to work out for you. So we try and help level set in this way to avoid this problem number 2. The last problem that I'll talk about is one that I think is kind of really one of the most important, and it's making sure that your strategy kind of is felt by the entire community. I hear too often from companies that they say, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna work on some stuff around sexual orientation. Once we have that done, we'll move on to gender identity and gender expression. We don't really prioritize the grounds that way. And I think that you do yourself a disservice when you do that. When you start to say, this group is more important and we're going to focus on them, or this group is larger. You just look at that kind of progression of that acronym. When you look at the movement, it used to be gay and lesbian movement, and it used to be, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and then LGBT, and the acronym gets longer and longer. The folks who have been, it's been easiest for them to fit into the dominant culture have always kind of gotten their services first. So that's one of the things that we want to avoid moving forward. We want to make sure that nobody's left behind in your strategy. And we want to make sure that, when you lift the most marginalized or most underserved in our community, it raises all of us up and it makes all of us better. And it helps people understand that, you don't need to be a cisgender straight person to be an ally. Queer folks, gay, lesbian folks, bi folks, we can be allies to everybody. Trans folks can be allies to everybody. So we have to look at, what connects us. Certainly those grounds that we have connects us in our challenges and how resilient we are and how creative we are as a group of people. But we also have to respect the differences that we see and the intersections that we see in the community, and acknowledge that, you might put a strategy together that really does target the needs of trans women of color, and say this is a group we don't see represented in our workforce, and we want to make sure that Pride at Work Canada can help round out our organizational knowledge so that we're including that underserved group in our D&I strategy. I see a really excellent example of this where I was moderating a panel, and there was somebody in the audience, and she said, I run an ERG here in Toronto, and we were having trouble attracting trans employees to our programs. I would really love some advice from some of the panelists on that. And somebody from the audience actually stood up and they said, I'm trans and I'm in your ERG, and I would be more than happy to help kind of promote more activities around trans inclusion. So it's an eye-opening moment for that individual where, they had been making a lot of assumptions about who was in the group and what they knew about different folks in their kind of immediate community. And, we want to encourage that kind of conversation and that rounding out of knowledge across as many different businesses as possible. So I'll give a little bit of a programs overview very quickly so that we have a time for questions at the end. But one of the things, something that's become very prominent in all of our schedules the last couple of weeks have been our webinars. And like I said, usually we do those just during the school year. We do usually one English and one French every month so that people have those natural checkpoints. But lately, we've been doing them every Wednesday at noon, and Jade has just done a fabulous job of shifting all of our programming online and making sure that our members and members of the public have just so much to do. And I've been so incredibly impressed by all of their work. But some, just generally around our webinars, some of the tips that we have that we've seen be really successful is, engage employees in discussions about the webinar kind of after as a group online or in person. And what we saw this very recently at one of our members where they asked as many people as possible from the company to join one of our webinars. I believe it was one about trans inclusion. And then they scheduled a week later, like a conversation where everybody got together and said, what did we all learn from that webinar? And how can we apply it to this workplace? And what are some of the ideas people have? And, they're starting to get, a better sense of how they can work as a collective to make it a more inclusive place for trans and gender diverse folks. Webinars are also a great way to engage people who work remotely. For a lot of the banks that we work with, they've got branch locations all over Canada, every province and territory. So it's a really good way for them to engage people who maybe don't have access to their internal programs that might be in person more often. Another thing that we do, roundtables, and I'm happy to say in the context of COVID, we're pivoting a lot of the roundtables that we had planned for the summer. We're going to be doing them as virtual roundtable discussions. But these are really, I love these. These are my favorite of all of our events, and I'm really looking forward to the 5 that we have coming up that are going to be segmented by region this summer. These are great discussions that bring together folks from a diversity of employers. I think Jade does an outstanding job of trying to curate the attendance at these events. So, we have one here that they did around thawing the frozen middle, working with middle management. I know Jade did a lot of work to try and make sure that we had HR folks around the table there so they could talk about some of the challenges there. But, some of the tips that we see, one of the great things I think about being an executive sponsor of an employee resource group is that you get to connect with people at different levels of the organization that you wouldn't normally connect with. So we always suggest that if you're going to send 2 people to one of these roundtables, try and send somebody who's like super senior and somebody who's more junior, because it's a really good succession planning opportunity for the employee resource group, or even within the D&I practice of the organization. Those people getting FaceTime with each other, you can maybe even start a mentorship relationship between those people, and they get to learn about their different experiences by both sharing in the roundtable. And then consider engaging employees from different parts of the organization. So, we did a great one that was about supplier diversity. I mean, if you just have somebody from HR at the supplier diversity roundtable, it's a huge missed opportunity to deal with somebody from supplier relations or supply chain, to bring them in and have them learn a little bit more about how you're engaging with the work that they do. And it's a great way of showing them that, you're a part of this too. So many people see diversity and inclusion as an HR thing. And I think that every department has an opportunity to engage in the strategy. So the roundtables are a great way of including people from all over the organization, not just the ERG or HR folks. The next thing, is our benchmarking. So this is something that is available currently because it's always done kind of online. It's an online survey that our employer members fill out. And then Jade will actually do an analysis based on the data that's provided to them. And it's about, saying, based on the information that you gave us and based on your business model and some of your goals, here are some of the things that we think that you should focus on over the next year or 2 years. And it's a great exercise to do year over year. You might see in some other organizations like Human Rights Campaign, they do a fabulous corporate equality index. And that works in the context of the states, because in the states, there are still so many states where you can be fired for being queer or trans. Whereas in Canada, we've got all these great employment protections. So it's less of a conversation about competing for talent by letting people know, hey, you're not going to be fired if you come work here. That's against the law in Canada. So what we actually look for here is how to go beyond the legal obligation or the legal, the bare minimum. How do we get to that point where you're being inclusive and you're being a leader? So that's how we try and encourage our members to benchmark year over year, so that Jade, when they provide the analysis, they can say, since last year, you've really improved in this area or that area, and we're really happy to see that. One of the tips that we have is, having a dedicated project lead that can kind of lead collecting information from all these different parts of the organization. And then, Jade is really happy to do these report back meetings where they say, based on the analysis, this is a recommendation. Jade's done it with a group of 2 or a group of 20. Have lots of people in there to make sure that they're able to make sure that they're all able to get the benefit. And then after receiving the results, make a timeline of what you want to make actionable, and give yourself some deadlines to make sure that those things actually end up happening. Because it's not enough just to get feedback. You have to actually kind of process it, and you have to do things. So another thing that we like to provide is ongoing advice. So I think Jade put it really well when they said the membership is like a gym membership. You actually have to go to the gym to see results. So you actually have to work out, you have to get in touch with us. We're your personal trainer and say, these are the things that I'm trying to improve on. And then you have to listen to us when we say, well, this is what I think you should focus on. But at the same time, it's important to keep in mind scope. So we have a whole bunch of members. And like I said, that membership model means that what we try and do with our, limited resources, our limited staff, is we try and do things like our webinars and roundtables and events and reports and research. We try and do things that all of our employer members can kind of come to en masse or receive by distribution. We simply don't have the capacity to do a lot of individualized consulting projects. So we're more than happy to have a phone call, exchange a few emails, look over some stuff that you've done. But sometimes people will get in touch with us and say, well, we'd love you to build out an entire training module for us. And for the price of our membership, it's just not something that we're able to do across the board for all of our members. So it's just not something that we're able to do on an individualized basis. But going through this benchmarking activity that I mentioned before is a great way of finding out what you have to work on and getting an idea from Jade about, what fits within the membership. So just, if you have questions about, data collection or, being connected around charitable giving, or, which pride activities do you think that we should get in touch, get connected with, we would love to hear from you. Like, we would love to hear from you and give a quick response on that's something that we have content that we can help you with right now. Here's a recording of one of our webinars. Why don't you watch that? And if you have questions after that, come back and ask us more questions. That sounds great. But sometimes we'll say, this is a really complicated problem. Like, what you're looking for is that you need an expert who's going to help you redesign this HR platform. So we will go into our contact database and find the best person, the best consultant, the best organization that we know that does that work, and we will refer them to you. And this is similar to when people say, we have a group in Thunder Bay that wants in-person training. We don't have locations in Thunder Bay. We're able to do things by webinar. But if you're looking for an in-person consultant, we will find somebody that we think meets our guidelines in terms of what content is right for you, and we'll make that connection for you. So there's really, there's no way of finding out how this ongoing advice thing works if you don't get in touch with either Jade or myself to say, this is our problem. How do we solve it? What are your quick recommendations? And we're happy to help you with that. The other thing I mentioned is sponsorship. So when we do events like our, even online events like this one, or when we do our annual conference or some of our networking events, the only ones that can sponsor those are our members, because we want to make sure that there's a commitment from all of our sponsors, that they're leveraging the membership, that they're engaging with our programs, that they're trying their best to improve on an ongoing basis. So we really want to make sure that the only folks that are sponsoring our events are people who are in our network. So there's lots of different ways to sponsor our events. We send them out all the time, and certainly if there's a priority target market that you're looking for in terms of brand exposure, you can always get in touch with us and we can see if it fits with anything that we're doing. We do offer some pretty quick brand amplification on our website. So all of our members have a partner page. What I would suggest for any members who are on this webinar right now, I think after this webinar, you should go to our website and see what is on your partner page right now, because I think sometimes our members forget that when they update their logos, or if they have new information about their D&I strategy, they have to get in touch with us to let us know so we can change the page. This page is customized by you, and it can change as many times as you want over the course of the membership. So I think that everybody should go, after this, they should go to our website and they should check out their partner page. And if there are things that they want changed, they should let us know through the info at email, because we can get Luis, our communications and marketing coordinator, on that right away. Some of the tips that we have for you is, we have a big audience in Quebec, and we have a Francophone audience all across Canada. So having bilingual partner pages could increase your brand visibility among our national audience. So we always recommend providing us French and English copy. Another thing is our job boards. So our job board's really low impact. All you have to do is work with our web developer so that he can scrape the postings from your internal site. He needs the correct RSS feed in order to do that. So if you are not sure what those things mean, or what the things mean on the screen, we are more than happy to work with your IT department. We will connect them with our web developer and with Luis, and they will work together to make sure that your jobs are mirrored on our job board. That's just one extra place for them to be found online, one more way for job seekers to find out all of the great opportunities that you have. And then one of the last things I'll talk about is our ambassador program. So our ambassador program is an opportunity for your employees in key regions to be involved with drop-in groups where they can kind of come. Every one of these groups is organized a little bit differently. You can see on the screen all of the locations that we have them in. We have them across Canada. We're always trying to grow these groups. I think next on the docket are Edmonton and Winnipeg. We're going to see how we can get things going there. But these are great groups. All of them function a little bit differently, but they're basically drop-in groups for people to come strategize around, what do we want to see Pride at Work Canada do in our city? What are some of the things that are going on in the community that we can share with our workplaces? And it's a great way for people to be engaged. So many of the companies that we work with are headed in Toronto and Montreal. So it's really important, I think, for some of the organizations that have a bigger presence in places like Calgary or Halifax or Victoria, to make sure that they have people that they can connect with locally. And all of these groups are run by either members of our board of directors or really super engaged volunteers that really know our work and are able to answer questions about what we do. And Val Walls is the director of national strategy on our board. They're the one who's organizing this group. They've got a bunch of really great things coming down the pipeline for this over the next couple of weeks. And we're hoping to see a lot of really great engagement from these groups on those regional roundtables that I mentioned for the summer. Another potential add-on is our on-demand e-learning products. We've got those online at education.privatework.ca. We have a significant discount for our members if they want bulk sales of these, but I encourage you, I'm sure that a link will be sent out after the presentation. I encourage you to go take a look at what we offer there. It's a great way of just supercharging people's knowledge by just saying, here's a course that you can do. I'm not going to tell you that anybody's going to become an expert by doing these courses, because there's so much to learn about the community, but this is a great start. And I know that the certificate program is certified for professional development hours for HRPA members in Ontario. So just quick 7-point executive summary of some of the programs we have. We've got webinars, we've got online engagement for your employees. They can tune in. There's no limit to the number of employees from your company that can join those webinars. So it's a great, quick and easy thing for you to do. No need for you to organize your own lunch and learns all the time. Just encourage people to go to these and then maybe try and do some follow-up with them afterwards. We've got roundtables for people to go to where they can connect with other professionals about really specific challenges, and they can really sink their teeth into what other organizations are doing. We've got that benchmarking program so that Jade can really help set those goals with you and make sure that you're on the right path. So like I said, you're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Ongoing advice so that, we know that sometimes you can't wait until that webinar that's 3 months down the road to get answers about, how to make your health benefits better. Get in touch with us. We will connect you with resources. We'll tell you any way that we can help within the scope of the membership. Sponsorship is a great way of getting your name out there, getting involved with our programming. If you ever have resources that you want to spend on sponsorship, brand activations, let us know. There's a lot of great brand amplification that's included in your membership through our member pages, job board, all that kind of stuff. And then we've got e-learning. Then you have got a significant discount on those courses. Those on-demand courses have a cost per license, but we knock a lot off for our members to make sure that they're accessible. And now that brings me to the very end of my presentation. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jade, who's able to kind of manage if there's any questions and do any additional follow-up. But I really do thank everybody for their kind attention today.
Thank you, Colin, for that presentation. I'm very grateful that we're actually able to answer some of these questions, because I know so much of the content that you went through today are things that I get asked quite a lot. So we do have some questions that are coming in. Some of them are ones that I feel like you did answer in some ways, but that I still think that we should address. So one of the questions that came up, and I think comes up quite regularly, is, do we provide any fee-for-service training?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question, and it does come up a lot, especially around Pride season. And, like I said, part of the membership model is that we don't have the capacity to do just as like in-person trainings for all of our members. So it's not something that's included in the membership. So when you want us to develop something to your specifications and come in and do engagements with your folks, we do offer a significant discount for our members, but that is something that we charge for. So if there's something that you want, you can always get in touch with us. And we can talk to you about some of the ready-made sessions that we do and what the pricing looks like. We usually do like a significant, like 50% discount for our members versus outside organizations. But those are things that we usually like to have a little bit of a conversation about. One of the ways that we work with community organizations across Canada is understanding some of the ones that we work with that are our preferred vendors for in-person training. And I know from my time working at other queer organizations that sometimes in-person training is kind of the lifeblood, or it's a primary revenue stream for small queer and trans not-for-profits. So sometimes, depending on where the engagement is, we're going to say, you know what, we're not the best ones to do that. We actually think that you should work with Center for Sexuality in Calgary, because you're in Calgary, they've already got something set up for this, and we know them to be excellent presenters, and we think that would be a really good opportunity for you. And that's just part of the value that we bring, that our network brings, because you might think of us first in terms of the right vendor for the training, but we might actually see somebody in our community who we think is better for that specific topic or that specific location. So it's always in your best interest to get in touch with us and say, this is what I'm thinking. And then sometimes we can talk to you about some things that might be available as part of the membership that are no cost, We can talk about what could be provided at low cost. And then we can talk to you about some things that might cost a little more, but then talk to you about what the benefit might be of making that additional investment. So we don't have like a specific menu. We like to have conversations because we actually don't think training is always the answer to every problem. So that's something that we like to talk about. And again, bring it back to what are the goals, what are the outcomes you're looking for, and how can we fine tune working with you to make sure that we're going to get you there instead of a training session that might not actually, meet the measure of what you're trying to reach. Does that answer the question, Jade, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it does. So we have quite a few questions coming in. I'm going to suggest we run a few minutes long today, but not too many. So maybe we can get through as many of these as possible with brief answers.
Sure.
So do sponsorships come as an additional cost to the membership fee?
Yes, sponsorships are exchanges of in-kind goods and services or money for brand exposure. So if you want to sponsor an event, if you want additional brand exposure of saying, XYZ company presents whatever event, you have to pay us for that. So we do look for cash sponsorship or in-kind. And when we look at in-kind, obviously things look a little bit different now. Traditionally, we accept in-kind sponsorship in the form of space, catering, AV for events, but not doing very many in-person events right now. So again, if you're looking for some extra brand exposure, get in touch with us. We'll tell you what we have coming up and we'll talk a little bit about pricing.
Great. And this is one that I will quickly answer. So is there a spot on our website where employees can access previous webinars? No, but employees can access previous webinars by emailing info@creditwork.ca, and they'll be provided a link and a password to that webinar. This is one for you though. So as an ally, for somebody who's looking to try and speak to leaders within their company, are there any things that you can suggest in terms of how they can convince those leaders to connect with us?
Yeah, we have a great, this presentation is based on like a membership deck that we have that goes through a lot of the same points. And I think one of the things that helps talking to senior leaders is bringing things back to, the impact that diversity and inclusion programs have on the community and the impact it's going to have on the organization. So I think trying to talk to us about what the right approach is usually good. That is something that we can coach. Like if you're interested in becoming a member and you want to hear about how other organizations have, successfully advocated for membership, get in touch with me, tell me what some of the challenges you're facing are, and we'll work on it together because we want to see you part of our network. So if there's any support you need advocating, get in touch with me. I'll see what kind of resources we have to share or what kind of coaching I can give.
Fantastic. Are we able to connect members to other members who are really excelling with a particular element or resource?
Yes, absolutely. We do that all the time. I mean, it all obviously depends on whether or not the company that you have in mind is open to having that conversation. But, I'm not in the habit of just giving out our members' contact information to people all over the place. I don't think that we would keep them as members too long if I did that too much. So sometimes when people say, well, we're a retail company and we want to talk to an organization that has successfully incorporated pronoun stickers onto their name tags, I'll say, okay, well, we have a member who's done that. Let me connect with them and see if they want to have a conversation with you. And I'll see if I can negotiate, whether or not that's an okay match, or, we'll go out and find some content for you that might be helpful in that area. But absolutely, I love making those connections. And I think it's one of the great things about having such a vast and diverse network is that we're able to get people connected on those really key topics that might be a little bit specific.
So another that comes up regularly to me is, beside the job board, does Pride at Work Canada have specific programs to connect LGBTQ2+ people looking for employment with companies?
Yeah, just really the job board. We're not a job matching service. And, our job board is great, but it's never going to be able to compete with the LinkedIn and those of the world. So there's certainly things that we can do. One of the things that's on screen is our LGBT best practice guide for employers, but then we've also got a report on broadening opportunities for job seekers. So the assistance that we can provide around recruitment we don't provide those connections. Like we don't do job fairs, we don't do job matching, we don't do mentorship programs, because our capacity is focused on providing our members support around policy and programs in ways that they can make systemic change. So one of the things that we can help with in that area is identifying for you through some of the research that we've done, what are some of the barriers people are encountering along the hiring process, and what are some of the things that you can do to make your opportunities more appealing to queer and trans people based on our research. Surprisingly, we found that participation in pride parades is very low on the list of priorities for job seekers. They want to see policies that show they're going to have an okay time at work, that they're going to be able to succeed at the same rate as everybody else. So we'd be more than happy to talk about those systemic things, because that's really more aligned with our mission as an organization. And we could certainly talk about some of the partners that we work with in the space around recruitment and some of the other organizations that we work with that focus on that more specifically.
Great. And one of the questions that I'm going to end on today, seeing as we are a bit over time, is with the pandemic and the move from in-person to online, I was wondering if you had any resources around building inclusive virtual events and trainings.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly learned a lot over the last couple of months. And I think that's something that's going to come out a lot in the facilitated virtual discussions that Jade's going to be holding over the summer. We did a really great roundtable at kind of the beginning of the pandemic in April 9th, I believe it was, around the impact that COVID has on LGBTQ2 plus communities. And I think Jade has been having a lot of great conversations with employers about the pivots they've made and some of the changes. So during the summer, we've got those 5 virtual discussions that are for our members, and they're segmented by region. So those are all on our website. And those are going to be great opportunities to connect with other organizations about what their pivot's been like and what are some of the ways that they're adapting their events and activities for employees. So it's a great opportunity to learn, not just from Jade, who's an amazing professional with lots of great experience in the space. It's a great way of learning from your colleagues among our members. So I would really direct you to those and look out for the stuff that we have coming up in the fall, because we're learning every day, like things that we can bring to our membership base. So I would look forward to the fall as well, because we're going to have a lot of exciting opportunities to learn like we are today.
And one thing that I would add is that if you are going to the Canadian LGBT Chamber of Commerce digital summit that is coming up on the Monday, I will actually be facilitating a panel on inclusion and diversity in the digital world. So we'll be having a very great discussion about how we can actually make these digital spaces inclusive. But that's a very long conversation in and of itself, but I'm looking forward to the discussion. Hopefully you could join us. So thank you so much, Colin, for this presentation. I know we've run a few minutes over, but not by much. There are other questions that people have asked. Please feel free to email us at info@prideatwork.ca for us to answer those questions, or feel free to direct them to myself or Colin directly. If you want to switch the slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So if you want to learn more from Pride at Work Canada, we do have a lot coming up. We're very, very excited. So although we've had to cancel our in-person events and our 11 city Pro Pride tour that we were planning, we have public events and member events coming up over the summer. So over the summer, we will be doing almost an event a week, taking a couple weeks here and there over the summer, but for the most part, every Wednesday, you'll be able to find an event from us. So we've listed those that we're doing in partnership with other organizations that will be for the public. So even if you aren't a partner, we really do encourage you to attend. And if you are a partner and you have more questions about how to make your workplace inclusive, Colin and I will be doing a virtual Q&A next week. So we will be back and getting to actually have a question and answer and discuss those very nitty-gritty issues of inclusion. So not just some of the ones that we got to deal with today, but what are the issues that you're dealing with right now? So we'll be very excited for that, as well as the facilitated virtual discussions that are based in each of the regions across Canada, that we really want to have those in-person discussions and connections between our partners, even through this time. So we're very grateful that you've all joined us today, and we really look forward to connecting with you more as we're all in this together. And thank you.